I realize I have no ambition. I cannot. All I want is to feel normal, to live like everybody else, with experience building on experience, each day shaping the next. I want to grow, to learn things and from things. I cannot imagine how I will cope when I discover my life is behind me, has already happened, and I have nothing to show for it. No treasure house of recollection, no wealth of experience, no accumulated wisdom to pass on. What are we if not an accumulation of our memories? In Before I Go to Sleep, Christine wakes up every morning with no memory of what happened before or who she is. S.J. Watson takes us on a journey to explore the implications of what that means for our everyday functioning and living, and we quickly find out we can't. A common misconception about backstory is that it comes before the story takes place and stays in the past. It's considered part of outlining, so understandably, writers would rather just dive straight into the story and figure out where to sprinkle in some flashbacks later on. Backstory is not pre-writing. It is writing. Stronger even, it is the most important writing we do. Before we meet your characters on page 1, they're going to need 3 requirements: a desire, a misbelief, and an origin scene. Let's first take a look at desire. Desire is not to be confused with goal. A goal is the external, tangible form of a desire. When we think about desire, it's easy to confuse it with something we want in the moment. But that's what I personally refer to as a want. A minor, short-term desire that easily changes based on a character's circumstances. If a character has just been on a long hike in the scorching sun, they probably want a shower. What went on before that decision to do the hike in the scorching sun in the first place? The type of desire we're looking for in backstory is a long-standing inner yearning. This desire is often intangible, more like a feeling or a state of being. The thing about this desire is that your character has been yearning for this state of being for a very long time, way before the readers even meet them. In fact, we often find characters right in the middle of trying to get it, on page 1. Remember Zuko? When we first meet him, he's already on the hunt for the Avatar. Right as we start questioning why, it's mentioned Zuko is a banned prince and needs to capture the Avatar because he wants his honor back. This is backstory. So how do we figure out what a character wants? There are 3 layers to a desire: the past layer, the driving layer, and the external layer. The past layer is a scene in a character's backstory that shows they have wanted something for a very long time. It's usually a problem they've been faced with. In the case of Zuko, we're shown that he's been trying to win his father's love and approval ever since he was young. He felt himself losing to his sister Azula and was afraid of being cast out, which is exactly what ended up happening. Ask yourself, what is a problem my character has been trying to solve for a very long time? The driving layer is a scene in a character's backstory that explains why they have wanted their desire for so long. The past experience that created their desire for the first time. It usually takes the form of a solution to a problem that they blame themselves for creating. What drives Zuko on his hunt for the Avatar is his quest for honor. He believes that he lost it when he spoke up against his father. A character's desire should be revealed through their actions and decisions, hence the driving layer. Ask yourself, what does my character think will solve this problem? How does it differ from what they actually need? Do you notice a pattern in all of their actions? Is all of it rooted in a single driving desire? The external layer is the physical representation of the solution or desire. In other words, their goal. This external layer can morph into different things, but the desire it represents remains the same. After Zuko was punished for speaking out against his father's plans, his father banned him with a promise to allow him back if he successfully captured the Avatar. Zuko's quest for honor thus takes the form of capturing the Avatar. Ask yourself, what could be the physical manifestation of my character's desire? How is my character's desire rooted in each of their physical actions and dialogue? Zuko's path is particularly ironic, because speaking out against his father's evil plans was probably the most honorable thing he did. He never even lost his honor, but he believes he did. Zuko has no evidence that the path he is on will actually lead him to his father's approval, and yet he is deluded into thinking it will. And that's the most important part. All of his actions stem from a misbelief. No character is a completely blank slate at the start of a story. They believe certain things. What are they wrong about at the beginning? Your hero cannot learn something at the end of the story unless they are wrong about something at the beginning. In this excerpt from John Truby's book Anatomy of Story, Truby emphasizes the need for a misbelief to achieve change. Ultimately, all stories are about change. In The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, the unnamed protagonist returns right back to where he started. Everything's the same. Nothing changed, except him. He couldn't have come to this final realization had it not been for the journey he took us on. Lisa Cron first coined the term misbelief in her brilliant book Story Genius. She defines the misbelief as a character's personal truth about how the world works and the nature of human beings. It's a type of judgment from which they gain power. A way of saying, ha, I know the secret to getting what I want without getting hurt in the process. In reality, it's the very thing that is keeping them from what they truly want. Everything in a story should be aimed at helping them overcome it. To do this, we first have to overcome our own misbelief about backstory, which is believing that backstory is synonymous to flashbacks. This is the exact belief that has given flashbacks a bad name. Flashbacks aren't bad, they're just misunderstood. Flashbacks are just a small part of backstory that show us a part of a character's past in more detail. They can be utilized for pacing purposes. Flashbacks halt the story, which can be beneficial for slower parts in the book where there's room for contemplation. A common pitfall is turning flashbacks into infodumps. A flashback keeps the scene from the past relevant to the story and its underlying message. An infodump lacks relevance. It fails to show the reader why it's important to know certain information right now, or worse, in general. But inserting a few well-written flashbacks is not enough to do backstory justice. A backstory should be laced through every single page. As we've discussed before, backstory is story. It is in the actions, decisions, dialogue, and words of each character. It is the why behind the entire book. Backstory helps us assess where a character started and how they changed at the end. But to establish change, we need to know what they changed from, and more importantly, why they needed to in the first place. The answer is in their misbelief. A misbelief functions as a psychological defense system, a personal delusion that every human being lives by in order to protect themselves from a specific type of childhood trauma. This can also explain how characters got super competent in a specific field. If a character is doing everything in their power to avoid the pain of losing a loved one ever again, this drive explains why they are the best soldier in the army. They mistakenly believe that if only they are strong enough, they can protect everyone. Imagine how world-shattering it is when they discover that even at their strongest, they will still fail to save someone. The misbelief stems from a character's worldview, which has been shaped by their earliest experiences in their formative years. In other terms, the origin scene. The origin scene helps us find when and where a character first started believing the lie that shapes their behavior. It is a scene that shows a character's upbringing, including all of the values and norms it instilled. If your character is extremely competitive, what type of upbringing could have instilled this character trait? Did they have to compete with their siblings for their parents' attention? Did their parents project their own shortcomings at work by disproving anything less than perfection? Did they fail an important test that their parents sacrificed everything for to give them? What was it that made them so adamant about winning? A common pitfall in crafting backstories is the tragic backstory. Writers will make characters a victim to their own past to the point where it is sad but not very meaningful. We have to watch out for this and remember our own why. Ask yourself, what's the point of my story? What is it really about? How can my character's backstory reflect this theme? Try to stay away from the general. We're looking for specifics, a specific scene that explains everything behind your character's motivations. How do you craft a story-specific origin scene? There are 3 definitive moments that an effective origin scene requires for both the writer and reader to understand the psyche of a character. The creation of the misbelief, the perpetuation of the misbelief, and finally, the escalation of the misbelief. The creation of the misbelief is a detailed experience that triggered your character's realization about how the world works. It's the moment Setien realized her sister wasn't sacrificed by her family, but murdered by a system that will claim her life too. The perpetuation of the misbelief is an experience in your character's past in which they operate from their misbelief for the very first time and gain their first win. This scene cements a character's misbelief because they are rewarded for acting on it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a positive or happy situation. It could be a terrible situation, but it should make your character feel powerful unlike ever before, as if they cracked the code of life. It's the moment in Better Call Saul when James McGill cons his first victim, his own father. The escalation of the misbelief is the problematic event that put your character in the situation we find him in on page 1. It's the moment Aang runs away from the air nomads and gets himself stuck in the iceberg, where our favorite siblings first encounter him, in episode 1. To come up with a character's formative backstory, their origin scene, ask yourself, what information about my character could help my readers better understand the impact of this character's current or upcoming circumstances? What lived experience in the character's past can convey this information? Once you have all of these backstory scenes in place, how do you go about weaving them into the story without infodumping? The timing of backstory can tell us more than the backstory itself. As in most novels, backstory is the counterbalance to the present, the ever-present lens through which the protagonist sees the world. In a sense, a story is about the battle between the past and the present within the protagonist's heart and mind. Our brains work like little time machines that are constantly gathering and revisiting memories, the better to anticipate what will happen in our future. This creates certainty that increases our likelihood of survival, and everything we do is oriented toward that single goal of survival. The hallway gossip we reluctantly overhear at work, the weather forecast we religiously watch, the spare tire under the floorboard of our car's trunk. All of these seemingly mundane events are rooted in our desire for certainty to guarantee survival. The gossip helps us keep our jobs. Survival. The weather forecast helps us prepare for Mother Nature's worst. Survival. The spare tire may save us from getting stuck in a deserted landscape. Survival. But the closer a past event is to our personal experience, the stronger the grip on our future behavior. That is to say that the backstory we're looking for is not a taught experience, an observed experience, or a logically conceived experience, but an experienced experience. The beauty of our primal urge for certainty is that it makes us ask,
why? Why
does this character? Why is this character? Why should this character? This why features a self-timer. It tells us exactly when we should provide the reader with backstory. Every time your character needs to make a decision, faces hesitation, feels fearful, or takes a surprising action, use it as a prompt to come up with a specific scene from their backstory that helps you explain the why behind it. You don't need to include a full-scale flashback to that specific experience every time they make a decision. Backstory goes a long way. One flashback could explain the why behind 100 decisions and actions to come. Use them sparingly to preserve their power. Often the most important or otherwise confusing decisions and actions warrant a flashback. You can also add details to a backstory scene that you haven't mentioned before, slowly revealing more and more until we get the full picture at the end of the story. Backstory is a lens that changes the way readers interpret everything up to that point and everything beyond. It carves meaning into the surface events, so it serves to be intentional with its timing. Before you write backstory into a scene, ask yourself, What do I want my readers to know about my character to better understand the severity or stakes behind the action they take or decision they make? How will the placement of backstory before or after the scene influence how the reader interprets the same scene? Could it have more impact at an earlier or later stage in the story? How does the inclusion of this backstory color everything that came before this scene? How does the inclusion of this backstory color everything that comes after this scene? Does this backstory scene warrant a full flashback, or can a few lines of backstory in the narrative suffice? And then we haven't even discussed the most important part, our why. Backstory should be relevant to what the story is about. It's easy to fall back into the clutches of the tragic backstory and melodramatic flashbacks if we're sprinkling them in at random with zero intention. We think that the more we victimize our character, the more our readers will empathize with them. But the truth is that we feel more drawn to characters that actively take matters into their own hands. Having a strong why behind your writing establishes a clear theme in your novel, by which you can assess the relevance of your character's actions and thought processes. Using backstory to explain the why behind those actions and motivations auto-syncs them to your theme. This theme is often rooted in our own beliefs and experiences, observed from the safe distance that is our story. Before you write backstory, ask yourself, what is my why, the theme of the story? How do my characters' backstory all connect with my why? What experiences from my own past can I draw from to create a more vivid experience for my readers? The stories we write are not just about our characters, you know. We do have backstories that influence the way we see the world and will continue to do so. Our history shapes our present. Or as William Faulkner put it, the past isn't dead. It isn't even past.